Dylan Walker adjusted his old baseball hat in the rear-view mirror, pulling it low enough to shadow his eyes. The fake glasses perched on his nose completed the disguise. Simple, effective, and unrecognizable to the hundreds of employees who might otherwise recognize the COO of Heritage Fried Chicken. He parked across the street from one of the chain's original locations, a once bustling restaurant nestled in the outskirts of Nashville. This place had once been the pride of the company's founder, his grandmother, Mary Walker, and Dylan had memories here that went back to childhood. But today, he wasn't visiting as an executive. He was here on a mission. Over the past quarter, customer satisfaction scores had taken a nosedive, profit margins were shrinking, and complaints had begun surfacing about slow service and declining quality. No matter how many polished reports he received from his corporate team, something didn't add up. So he decided to see it for himself. No assistants, no media team, no boardroom buffer, just Dylan and the truth. The moment he stepped through the glass door, a wave of nostalgia hit him like warm air from an old oven. The smell of frying chicken, sweet biscuits, and creamy gravy wafted through the dining area, but something else trailed behind that scent. An unease. The walls bore faded photos of family farms and award-winning dishes, but the decor was aging. Ceiling tiles showed stains from old leaks, and a flickering fluorescent light near the window gave the dining room a restless hum. A teenager with a half-hearted smile greeted him at the counter. "Welcome to Heritage Fried Chicken," she said, her voice flat. Dylan offered a tired smile in return. "Just me today," he replied, slipping into a soft southern drawl he hadn't used in decades. "Heard y'all still serve the best fried chicken in Tennessee." The teen, her name tag read Amber, nodded and pointed toward an empty booth. "Seat yourself. Someone will be right with you." Dylan chose a corner booth near the back and pulled out a menu. He didn't need it. He could recite it from memory. The chain's signature three-piece fried chicken plate, served with mashed potatoes, coleslaw, and a buttermilk biscuit, had been the cornerstone of Heritage's success for decades. His grandmother had perfected the recipe herself, a secret blend of 11 herbs and spices that had once made food critics rave and customers drive across state lines. Dylan placed his order with Amber and leaned back, eyes discreetly scanning the restaurant. The place was only half full despite it being peak dinner hour, and the staff moved with a sluggishness that hinted at low morale or poor management. Or both. The energy was wrong. This wasn't the place he remembered. 20 minutes later, his food arrived. At least 5 minutes later than company service standards allowed. Dylan offered a thank you and stared at the plate. Visually, the chicken looked just right. Golden brown, crispy edges, steam rising from the drumstick like a cue in a food commercial. But Dylan didn't rely on appearances. He picked up a piece and took a slow, thoughtful bite. The crunch was there, the satisfying shatter of breading he'd helped perfect over years of recipe refinement. The meat was juicy, cooked well. But as the flavor settled on his tongue, Dylan's expression changed. He set the piece down, wiped his fingers, and stared at the plate like it had betrayed him. It wasn't bad. In fact, most customers would have found it delicious, but Dylan knew every nuance of that recipe. And this wasn't it. Something subtle was missing. The warmth of the spice blend was there, but dulled. The hint of rosemary that his grandmother insisted gave it soul was absent. He tried a second piece, a different cut, just to be sure. Same issue, close, but off. The chicken had the look and feel of Heritage Fried Chicken, but not the heart. He leaned back in the booth, trying not to let the disappointment show on his face. If customers were complaining, they had every right, and if this wasn't just a one-time mistake, then something far worse was going on. The spice blend, which was portioned and sealed by the corporate supply chain, should have been untouchable. Encrypted and locked away, known only to Dylan, the executive chef, and 3 others at the top of the company. His thoughts were interrupted by laughter from the service station. Dylan glanced over and saw 2 employees. One of them was Ember, the other a tall young man wearing a backward cap and grease-stained apron. They leaned close, whispering with a giddy kind of energy that didn't fit the tired tone of the rest of the team. He couldn't hear them clearly, not yet, but something about their body language pulled at his instincts, Years of boardroom experience had taught him how to spot the quiet corners where real problems lived. Dylan slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, opening the voice memo app and setting it face down on the table. He took a slow sip of sweet tea and turned his ear toward the voices behind him. Whatever was happening at this location, it was deeper than bad lighting and slow service. And Dylan Walker was about to uncover the truth, one bite at a time. Dylan sat motionless in his booth, one hand gently swirling his sweet tea while his eyes remained fixed on the condensation slipping down the glass. But his ears were sharp, attuned to every syllable drifting over from the nearby service station. The restaurant's soft clatter of trays and muted chatter formed a natural cover, but he could still make out the voices. The girl who had served him, Jenna, and a young man he hadn't yet encountered, who wore the aura of someone too smug for a job like this. Cody, she called him. Their whispers were strained at first, but soon Cody's tone shifted into something bolder. "I'm telling you," he said, his voice low but laced with pride. "We already made the drop. The recipe's gone, and we're 20 grand richer because of it." Dylan's fingers tightened around his glass. Jenna shushed him immediately, glancing over her shoulder. "Keep your voice down," she hissed. "You don't know who's listening." Cody just chuckled. "No one's listening, Jenna. Relax. The files are with Golden Rooster now. They've already started testing it out in their kitchens. By next month, it'll be rolling out nationwide. Under a different name, slightly tweaked, but it's our blend." Dylan's stomach turned. His grandmother's secret recipe, developed over decades with care and tradition, was now a bargaining chip in a corporate heist. And these two, these employees in aprons and rubber-soled shoes, were sitting on $20,000 of betrayal, talking like they'd just won the lottery. He leaned slightly toward the backrest, positioning himself for better audio without appearing interested. Every word was fuel. "What if someone at corporate finds out?" Jenna asked nervously. "That recipe's locked down tighter than the Pentagon." Cody scoffed. "Not when someone on the inside opens the door for you. There's a guy. Don't worry about who. Higher up than you'd expect. Let's just say he's got a gambling habit and expensive taste." Guy was desperate. One payment, and suddenly the file wasn't so locked anymore. Dylan's breath caught in his chest. Someone from corporate had been involved. Not just rank-and-file employees, but someone inside his own circle. Someone he trusted? His mind immediately started scanning the faces of his senior team, weighing who might be vulnerable, who might have debts or secrets. He'd spent years building a leadership team he believed in, mentored them, promoted them. The thought that one of them might have sold out Heritage Fried Chicken's most sacred asset was more than disheartening. It was devastating. "Golden Rooster's going to crush it," Cody continued, leaning against the service station with a smug grin. "They changed it just enough to avoid lawsuits, but it's basically the same flavor. Only difference is their marketing team knows what they're doing. Plus, with our intel on how Heritage handles supply chain, they're going to undercut pricing at 3 of our biggest markets." Jenna still looked uneasy. "It just feels wrong. I mean, it's not just the recipe. It's a piece of history. Didn't the founder create it from scratch?" Cody rolled his eyes. Yeah, some grandma with a notebook and a dream. But this is business, Jenna. And nobody's going to miss a chicken recipe when the real money starts flowing. You think Dylan Walker cares about people like us? He's probably off on a yacht while we bust our backs for $12.00 an hour. Dylan stared down at the remains of his meal, jaw clenched, every nerve in his body humming with fury. This wasn't just operational sloppiness or an underperforming location, this was a calculated act of sabotage. His grandmother's legacy had been stolen and turned into a commodity for a competitor's profit. And the worst part? It wasn't just the betrayal of 2 disgruntled employees. It was systemic. There was a leak in his executive team, someone high enough to access one of the most protected files in the company's digital vault. Someone who not only knew the recipe, but knew how to bury their tracks. This wasn't just a crime, it was a war. And Dylan had walked into it with no backup, no plan, just instinct and a lifetime of heritage now dangling over the edge. As Cody and Jenna wandered off toward the kitchen, laughing and clinking cups like nothing had happened, Dylan took a slow breath and picked up his phone. His voice memo app had captured every word. He didn't move right away. He couldn't. The betrayal cut too deep. It wasn't just about the money or the brand. It was about the promise he made to his grandmother on the day she handed him the family recipe. Never let this be just a business. It's our story. And now, that story was being sold for 20 grand and a seat at someone else's table. But Dylan wouldn't confront them. Not yet. If a conspiracy this large had reached all the way to the top, then he would need more than emotion. He would need a plan, solid proof, and precise timing. Because if they thought they could bury the heart of Heritage Fried Chicken without consequence, they were about to be reminded who built the empire they were trying to burn. Dylan kept his composure as he slowly lifted the phone from the table, locking the screen and slipping it into his pocket like a man merely checking a text. The voice recording was running in the background, capturing every syllable that had just passed between Cody and Jenna. His heart was racing, not just from anger, but from the enormity of what he was beginning to uncover. Betrayal was bad enough, but betrayal wrapped in corporate manipulation, that struck at the very foundation of Heritage Fried Chicken. It wasn't just a stolen recipe. It was a full-fledged conspiracy. As the two employees disappeared through the double doors to the kitchen, Dylan glanced around the dining area, then stood and slowly made his way toward the service hallway, careful to remain unseen. From the other side of a supply rack near the break room, their voices carried on, lower now, but still within range. "Do you think Travis is going to be okay with us talking this openly?" Jenna asked, her voice tinged with worry. "He's already paranoid someone's going to connect the dots," Cody scoffed. "Travis is too busy polishing Brent's shoes to care. Besides, it was his idea to loop us in. He gets a cut, remember? He's not going to screw up his own payday." Dylan's eyes narrowed. Travis Bennett, the branch manager. Dylan remembered approving his promotion 2 years ago, largely on the recommendation of Brent Lawson, Heritage COO and, until recently, Dylan's closest advisor. The thought of both men working together to poison the company from within sent a cold chill through Dylan's chest. He'd mentored Brent for nearly a decade, trusted him with confidential strategy, made him the number 2 in command, and now Brent was selling out Heritage Fried Chicken for a seat at the competition's table? "I still can't believe Brent pulled this off," Jenna whispered, awestruck. "The recipe, the location data, the financial projections. How did he even get all of that?" Cody's voice dropped an octave, his pride palpable. "He's been planning it for months. Said Golden Rooster promised him a board seat if he could cripple Heritage's growth pipeline. And we're just the beginning. You think this is about one recipe? Travis said Brent's feeding them expansion strategies, vendor contacts, even internal audit schedules. Heritage is being hollowed out from the inside." Dylan felt the blood drain from his face. Every fear he'd had walking into this restaurant was now confirmed and magnified. This wasn't about one store or a couple of rogue employees. It was systemic, strategic, corporate sabotage orchestrated by someone at the very top. As the conversation continued, Dylan heard them laughing softly, as if they were sharing an inside joke. "You know what's really wild?" Cody said. "Golden Rooster's already planning a launch campaign around the new recipe. They're calling it Golden Heritage." Jenna gasped. "They're stealing the name too?" "It's all part of the play," Cody replied. "They want to confuse the market, blur the lines. By the time Dylan figures it out, if he ever does, customers won't know who had it first." The irony stung deep. Dylan had spent his entire career building a brand that meant something. Authenticity, family values, real Southern cooking. And now those words were being twisted into a marketing slogan by the very people trying to destroy him. He ducked out of the hallway, back into the dining room, and returned to his booth, keeping his movements calm, controlled. The weight of what he had just heard pressed on his chest like a boulder. Travis was actively managing the betrayal at the ground level. Brent was orchestrating it from the top, siphoning off intellectual property, internal strategies, and confidential growth plans. And worst of all, they were using frontline employees like Cody and Jenna as pawns. buying their silence with cash and false promises. Dylan sat in silence, staring at the cold remnants of his mashed potatoes, his appetite long gone. He had built this company with long nights, tough decisions, and a commitment to his grandmother's vision. And now, that legacy was being leveraged as a bargaining chip by those he trusted most. Still, Dylan knew one thing: emotion couldn't win this battle. Not rage, not pride. What he needed now was strategy, patience, and undeniable proof. A recording wasn't enough, not yet. He needed deeper evidence, clean documentation, and, most of all, the element of surprise. Confronting Brent or Travis now would only drive them further underground, cover their tracks. No, Dylan would play the long game. Let them believe they were still in control. Let them move forward with their next steps, not realizing that every move was now being watched, every word recorded, every transfer traced. Because, when the moment came, Dylan Walker wasn't just going to fire them, he was going to destroy them. Legally, financially, and publicly. And reclaim the story that was stolen from his family's hands. The air was heavier than usual in Dylan Walker's corner office the next morning. The sun had barely risen, but the walls already felt too tight, too polished, like a gilded cage. He sat motionless, staring at the framed photo of his grandmother, Mary Walker, beaming in front of the original Heritage Fried Chicken shack. That picture used to inspire him. Today, it felt like a silent judgment. He had allowed something sacred to be stolen, right from under his nose. And now, the same values that built this empire were being sold to the highest bidder. He needed answers, not from boardroom reports or sanitized executive briefings, but from the source, the front lines. If his enemies were bold enough to commit betrayal in the dining room, then Dylan would be bold enough to meet them there. Not as their boss, as one of them. Within hours, he was on a secured line with Natalie Chen, his longtime head of security, a former FBI investigator with a knack for finding the truth in places others overlooked. "I need you to make me disappear," he told her. There was silence on the line. "Disappear how?" she asked, cautiously. Dylan didn't hesitate. "I need a new identity, employment documents, background story, something clean and untraceable. I'm going back in, but this time from inside the kitchen." Natalie tried to talk him down. It was too dangerous, too extreme. But the more Dylan explained, Brent Lawson's betrayal, the voice recordings, the growing corporate sabotage, the more Natalie's resistance shifted into resolve. "Give me 24 hours, she finally said. "You'll be Mark Collins by tomorrow night." By the end of the day, Dylan had cleared his schedule under the pretense of a family emergency, silenced his usual digital footprint, and vanished from the executive radar. The COO of Heritage Fried Chicken was officially off the grid. Dylan checked into a no-name motel on the city's edge, using cash and his new identity. The room smelled like bleach and mildew. The carpet had cigarette burns, and the TV only played 3 working channels. It was perfect. He left behind his tailored suits, trading them for a worn flannel shirt, faded jeans, and a pair of boots he hadn't worn since his high school summer job. The disguise wasn't just about fooling others. It was about remembering. Remembering what it felt like to be invisible. To work with your hands, to earn every ounce of respect. Natalie delivered a full set of documents that night. A Georgia state ID, social security number, fake pay stub from a defunct diner in Des Moines. Everything held up under scrutiny. By the time Dylan walked into the same Heritage branch the next morning, the only thing recognizable about him was the determination in his eyes. The hiring process was laughably casual. Travis barely looked up from his tablet as Dylan, now Mark Collins, sat across from him in the cramped back office. "Experience?" Travis mumbled. 3 years on the line at Bonnie's Diner. Closed down last year," Dylan replied in a humble southern accent he hadn't used since college. "Just looking for steady work. I'll clean whatever you need." Travis shrugged, not bothering to double-check. "Dish pit's a mess, pays $13 an hour. No benefits till after 90 days. You want it?" Dylan nodded. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, sir." And just like that, The man who once approved franchise expansions and oversaw billion-dollar operations was handed a stained apron and pointed toward the back of the kitchen. No one recognized him. No one cared. He was just another body to scrub pans and mop floors, and that made him dangerous. The next 10 hours broke Dylan in ways he didn't expect. The industrial soap burned his skin. The heat from the fryer filled the dish area like a swamp. His muscles ached from lifting 30-gallon waste bins and cleaning grease traps that hadn't been touched in weeks. He bled from a busted knuckle, cut his palm on a broken plate, and soaked through his clothes twice before the shift was done. But through the sweat and steam, he listened. He watched. He took mental notes. No one paid attention to the dishwasher, and that was his edge. He heard Ethan bragging about supply chain loopholes, saw Travis slip into his office during slow hours, locking the door to make calls. He noticed that Jenna, despite her involvement, often sat alone during breaks, fidgeting with her phone and glancing nervously around. Cody strutted like a man who thought he owned the place, and the kitchen was running half as efficiently as it should have been, the food quality declining each day. By day 3, Dylan had settled into a rhythm. He arrived early, stayed late, never asked questions. He learned how to blend into the background, even as he continued collecting whispers and moments of tension. He began quietly mapping the web of betrayal. Who spoke to whom? Which shifts held the most suspicious conversations? Where paperwork and login terminals were left unsecured? During one late-night shift, he offered to clean the manager's office, using the opportunity to photograph documents on Travis's desk. Inventory reports, internal memos, vendor logs. He even managed to clone the restaurant's shift drive with a device Natalie had smuggled in disguised as a charger. Every night, Dylan returned to his motel and uploaded his findings to a secure server, and every night, the evidence grew more damning. But it wasn't just about the data. It was about the disconnect. Dylan was seeing firsthand how far removed corporate leadership had become from reality. Burned-out staff, shortcuts in food prep, mismanaged morale. His grandmother had once said, "The moment you stop listening to your people is the moment you stop feeding their trust." Dylan had stopped listening. He knew that now. He'd trusted metrics over morale, spreadsheets over stories, and that blind spot had nearly cost him everything. But now, he was back in the trenches, not just to expose a conspiracy, but to reconnect with the soul of the company his family built. And when the reckoning came, it wouldn't just be about punishment. It would be about rebuilding, starting from the sink, the floor, the very foundation. The longer Dylan Walker lived as Mark Collins, the deeper he sank into the quiet underworld of his own empire. A week had passed since he first slipped into the dish pit, and by now his face was just another blur in the steam, sweating, scrubbing, and blending in. He was invisible in the best possible way. No one questioned why he was always around during breaks. No one noticed that he often cleaned near the server station or lingered near the walk-in freezer where private conversations tended to happen. He moved like a shadow, low, silent, unnoticed, and every single shift he collected more fragments of truth. At lunch, he overheard Travis telling Ethan to burn all paper invoices after Friday. On a delivery day, he caught a glimpse of an unfamiliar black car in the alley, a car he'd later confirmed through security footage as belonging to a Golden Rooster logistics consultant. This wasn't coincidence anymore. It was a coordinated bleed-out of the company from the inside. Dylan wasn't just listening, he was documenting. Natalie had equipped him with a pen that doubled as an audio recorder and a set of thermal lens glasses to discreetly capture images from anywhere in the restaurant. At night, he downloaded the files to a secure hard drive and built out timelines. Conversations cross-referenced with delivery schedules, access badge entries, expense logs. And it was working. By day 7, he had undeniable links between Travis and Golden Rooster reps, including a recurring transaction pattern from a shadow LLC that Dylan traced back to Brent Lawson's personal holding company. The trail wasn't even well hidden, just buried in complexity. But Dylan had spent years analyzing franchise acquisition proposals and offshore vendor networks. He knew how to read between the numbers, and what he found was damning. Brent had breached the executive recipe server 3 times within the last 2 months. Once during a weekend when Dylan had been out of state, and again the morning before the first test batch of Golden Heritage launched across town. To prove it, he needed more than server logs. He needed Brent's correspondence, emails, phone records, possibly even wire transfers. That meant getting deeper into Travis's system, which was riskier than anything he'd attempted so far. He planned it meticulously. One Tuesday night, he volunteered to stay late and deep clean the manager's office, claiming he'd noticed a leak under the desk. Travis didn't care. He was halfway out the door and barely listening. Once inside, Dylan locked the door, pulled on a pair of gloves and removed a tiny cloning device from inside his boot. Natalie had customized it to look like a phone charger. He plugged it into Travis's desktop tower, then waited as it silently copied everything: documents, emails, local cache data. It would take 8 minutes. 8 long minutes. As the progress bar crept forward, Dylan used the time to scan the drawers and shelves. He found sticky notes with passwords, a drawer with prepaid gift cards, even a printed list of priority vendors that included a company Dylan knew was a Golden Rooster shell distributor. The deeper he dug, the clearer the picture became. Travis wasn't just playing middleman. He was actively leaking logistics schedules, ingredient specifications, and store-level performance metrics to a competitor, information that could easily cripple Heritage's expansion model. By the time the clone completed, Dylan's hands were shaking. He removed the device, wiped down every surface, and left the office exactly as he found it. If Travis suspected anything, it didn't show. The next morning, he greeted Dylan with a grunt and handed him a mop, just like always. The real shock came that night, when Natalie decrypted the files. Inside the cloned hard drive were email threads directly linking Travis to Brent. One message had the subject line, "Final batch of legacy data," with an attachment that matched the encryption used on Heritage's recipe servers. Another showed Brent wiring $12,000 0 cents in monthly consulting fees to Travis's shell account, labeled as performance incentives. And then there was a spreadsheet titled HFC to GR Rollout Phase 2, which outlined a month-by-month timeline for sabotaging Heritage's launch calendar, pushing substandard ingredients into the supply chain, and even altering vendor reviews to damage supplier relations. It wasn't just underhanded, it was surgical, precise, and methodical, like something you'd expect from an enemy intelligence agency, not your own. The evidence now filled an entire encrypted folder. Dylan could feel the weight of it every time he opened his laptop, the proof of betrayal, collected piece by piece through sweat, grease, and the quiet art of observation. But there was one problem left. It was all circumstantial unless he could prove that Golden Rooster had already deployed the stolen recipe in the market. That final link, the actual product, would be the nail in the coffin. And Dylan wasn't willing to wait for it to happen naturally. No, he had something else in mind. A trap, a decoy recipe, something so tempting, so perfectly packaged, that Brent and his conspirators wouldn't be able to resist stealing it. If they took the bait and it surfaced in Golden Rooster's kitchens, there would be no denying what they'd done. No way to spin it. No room to breathe. For now, Dylan kept his cover intact. He washed dishes, mopped floors, and nodded along to conversations he already knew the truth behind. He smiled at Travis like nothing had changed. But inside, the clock was ticking. His case was almost complete, and when the final piece fell into place, Dylan Walker wouldn't just expose a conspiracy. He'd rewrite the legacy that someone tried to steal. It was near the end of his second week when Dylan began to notice the shift, not in procedure or quality control, but in people. Specifically, Jenna. At first, she'd moved comfortably in Cody's orbit, laughing too loud, speaking too boldly, the kind of bravado that made Dylan instinctively wary. But lately, she had started to pull back. She no longer lingered near Cody during prep or shared inside jokes with Travis like she had on Dylan's first few days. During breaks, she sat alone, earbuds in but music never playing. She looked more anxious, glancing over her shoulder when Cody approached, giving clipped answers when Travis barked orders. Something had changed. Dylan, always observant beneath the surface of the man scrubbing dishes, knew the signs of doubt when he saw them. It wasn't guilt written across her face, it was conflict. She had 1 foot in and 1 foot reaching for the edge. It was a Tuesday evening, just after the dinner rush, when the opportunity finally came. Jenna was in the storage room sorting napkin bundles and condiments, clearly a task she had volunteered for to avoid interaction. Dylan moved to the far shelf, pretending to close the door halfway behind him, and waited, giving them just enough privacy without drawing attention. Seriously? He asked lightly. Jenna didn't look up. Better than being out there, she muttered. A pause hung between them. Cody getting on your nerves, Dylan offered, keeping his tone casual. She hesitated, then turned to face him, arms crossed. You ever do something you thought was harmless? Until it wasn't. Her voice was quieter now, less guarded. Dylan tilted his head, playing the part of the curious new guy. Depends on the harm. Jenna exhaled. They're talking about changing the chicken, she said. Like degrading it on purpose, cheapening the seasoning, buying lower quality parts, making it worse without telling anyone. She rubbed her temples. They say it's just to save costs, that no one will notice, but that's not the plan. The real goal is to tank the brand, make customers lose trust so sales crash. Then Golden Rooster sweeps in and buys up everything at half value. Dylan felt his pulse quicken. This was it. Confirmation that the plan went beyond theft and into active destruction. But he stayed composed. And you're not okay with that, he said. It wasn't a question. Jenna shook her head. I needed the money. I really did. My mom's in chemo and her insurance barely covers half of it. I thought this would be a one-time deal. Sell a file, walk away. But this, hurting customers, hurting people who trust the food, that's not what I signed up for. The moment felt real, raw. Jenna wasn't a villain. She was a scared daughter backed into a corner by people who offered cash in exchange for silence. Dylan saw something in her that he hadn't seen in anyone else involved. Remorse. And maybe, just maybe, a willingness to make it right. He decided to take a risk. What if someone was gathering evidence? He asked slowly. Someone who could stop them before things got worse? Jenna narrowed her eyes, uncertain. What are you talking about? Before Dylan could offer anything more, the door slammed open behind them. Travis stood in the doorway, eyes flicking between them. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried weight. Interesting conversation, he said coldly. Didn't realize we were holding staff meetings in the stockroom. Jenna stepped back instantly, her hands raised. Just going over inventory. Mark had questions. Did he? Travis said, his gaze now fixed on Dylan. Well, when you're done answering questions, Mark, I need you out front. Someone dropped a gallon of sweet tea all over table 6. Should be fun for you. Dylan nodded, masking the spike of adrenaline with a placid, obedient smile. Yes, sir, on it. As he walked past, Travis grabbed his arm, not hard, but enough to communicate something more, a warning. When you're finished, stop by my office. We should talk about your future here. Then he released him and disappeared into the hallway. Back at the mop sink, Dylan's mind was spinning. He didn't know how much Travis had heard, but it didn't matter. His cover had been intact. Until now. Jenna's confession had pushed things to the edge, and the next step would be dangerous. But he also knew something else. She could be the key. If she was willing to help, willing to flip on the others, Dylan's case would go from strong to ironclad. The question now wasn't whether Travis was suspicious, it was whether Jenna still had time to choose the right side, before the walls started closing in around them all. Dylan had barely finished wringing out the mop when Travis called him into the office. The flickering fluorescent light above the narrow hallway buzzed like an alarm, heightening every step Dylan took. He kept his head slightly bowed and his demeanor humble. Still very much Mark Collins. The dishwasher no one noticed. The man who didn't ask questions. Travis sat behind his desk, leaned back with one ankle resting on his knee and a styrofoam cup in his hand, half full of what smelled like flat soda and stale bourbon. His eyes tracked Dylan with a mixture of amusement and calculation. Close the door, he said. Dylan did. You've been working hard, Travis continued, his voice casual. Quiet, reliable. Don't complain. That's rare these days. Dylan nodded once. Just grateful for the job, sir. Travis smirked. Don't call me sir, makes me feel old. There was a pause before Travis leaned forward, placing the cup down slowly. How would you like to earn more than dishwashing wages? He asked, voice dropping just enough to signal this wasn't a casual offer. Dylan kept his posture deferential. Depends on the work. Travis raised an eyebrow. The work is flexible. You just need to know how to keep things quiet. There are certain conversations, certain procedures, stuff not everyone in the building needs to know about. You follow? Dylan met his eyes briefly, then looked down again. I'm not looking to cause problems, just trying to make rent. Travis smiled, satisfied. Good. Real good. We'll talk again soon. Keep your head down. Keep showing up. Maybe there's a better position in your future. Dylan nodded again and backed out of the office, heart pounding, not from fear but from confirmation. He was in. That night, long after closing, Dylan returned to the break room under the pretense of organizing the supply closet. The crew had gone home. Travis had already left as usual 20 minutes before close, never staying longer than needed. Dylan took out a small pouch from his sock, pulling a sleek black button no larger than a quarter. A listening device. High range. Voice activated. Natalie had given him two. One was already buried under the service station's counter. This one would go under the table where Travis and Cody always gathered when they thought no one was watching. With quick, practiced motion, Dylan peeled back the sticker and pressed it under the lip of the table, near the power strip. He double-checked it. Green light. Active. Then he wiped the counter clean, arranged the chairs, and left without a trace. Back at his motel room, Dylan powered up the encrypted laptop Natalie had provided. At 2:11 a.m., a message popped up in the secure channel. From Natalie. He took the bait. His breath caught. Natalie had uploaded a decoy recipe file to the protected server earlier that day. A convincingly real, new blend of seasonings that Dylan and the executive chef had cooked up as a test. It was fake, of course. Harmless on paper, but disastrous if actually used. The file was encrypted, accessible only to the executive team, and tagged with a silent tracker. Only one person had authorization to view it without tripping alarms, Dylan himself. The moment someone else accessed it, Natalie would know. And now they did. Brent Lawson had opened the file, copied it, downloaded it. The tracker confirmed it. Dylan sat back, exhaling through his teeth. Got you. They'd designed the decoy to be irresistible, labeled HFC 2025 Formula Confidential Final Version, buried 3 folders deep inside the executive R&D archive. It looked real. It tasted legitimate. But a single swap of an herb, a small tweak in balance, it would make any batch taste bitter, strange, incomplete. A company deploying it would only realize something was wrong once the product hit scale. And now Brent had it, probably smiling to himself, probably feeding it directly to Golden Rooster's R&D team as the next big culinary weapon. Dylan felt a dark satisfaction settle into his bones. It wasn't enough to catch them stealing. He needed them to act on it, to roll it out publicly. That would be the point of no return. Still, the clock was ticking. His listening devices were active. His tracker was pinging. But the human element, the unpredictability of Travis, Cody, and Jenna, was still volatile. Dylan couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Not when the walls were finally beginning to close in around Brent and his allies. He checked his phone. No new messages. Then, just as he shut the laptop, another encrypted ping came through. Listening device picked up partial conversation, 9:24 p.m. keyword supply chain test batch launch date. Dylan grinned. The trap was working. They were moving forward with the recipe. Now all he had to do was follow them into the dark and shine a light bright enough that no one, no board member, no lawyer, no customer, could ever deny what had been done. The trap was set. Now all Dylan could do was wait. Wait for the first tremor that would confirm Brent had taken the bait, that the false 2025 formula was not only downloaded, but acted upon. He didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, while cleaning up after a particularly chaotic lunch rush, Dylan overheard Jenna talking near the dish pit. Her voice was low, almost like she didn't want to be heard, but curiosity got the best of her. "Have you heard about the new product line Golden Rooster's launching?" she asked Cody, who leaned against the wall sipping a soda. "They're calling it Golden Heritage. Supposed to be their most premium chicken yet. Travis said it's based on some secret R&D breakthrough." Cody just grinned and nodded. "Yeah, that's the one Brent sent over. The blend we helped them steal." Jenna hesitated. "You sure it's safe? I mean, if it's based on that weird new file, it's already being printed on their menu boards," Cody replied, shrugging. "Too late to back out now." Dylan didn't flinch. He couldn't. But inside, the confirmation hit like lightning. Golden Heritage. The name wasn't just a nod to heritage-free chicken. It was a blatant attempt to sow confusion in the market, to piggyback on brand familiarity while undercutting authenticity. And more importantly, it meant the decoy recipe had been deployed. That night, after a brief coded text exchange with Natalie, Dylan drove across town to a new Golden Rooster location in Midtown. The parking lot was buzzing. Promotional signs lined the windows. One caught his eye immediately. "Introducing Golden Heritage, the flavor of the South, reimagined." He parked 2 blocks away, slipped on a baseball cap and hoodie, and walked in through the side entrance like a regular customer. Inside, the restaurant was sleek. Bright lighting, digital kiosks, wall-mount flat screens playing ads in a loop. He scanned the menu. There it was. Golden Heritage Chicken. Premium recipe, launching this week only. He stepped in line, ordered a 3-piece meal, and waited, heart pounding. Not with fear, but with anticipation. When the food arrived, he carried it to a corner booth and took a seat, phone angled downward, camera recording. He unwrapped the chicken slowly, examining the breading, the color, the spice dusting. Visually, convincing. But the first bite confirmed it. Bitter, metallic undertones, unbalanced seasoning, and a strange dryness that clung to the roof of the mouth. They had used the fake formula. Dylan could feel the burn of it. His trap now live. Their mistake irreversible. He documented everything, photos of the signage, the packaging, the digital receipts. Then he slipped into the restroom and messaged Natalie. "They launched it. Confirmed usage of decoy, full documentation secured." Her reply came quickly. "Received. Activating public exposure plan. See you tonight." That night, in Natalie's secure office, surrounded by hard drives, locked cabinets, and a whiteboard covered in red marker lines connecting names and events, the team got to work. Everything they had collected, voice recordings, emails, bank statements, file logs, digital surveillance, and now live deployment of the decoy, was compiled into a master folder. Natalie uploaded it to 2 encrypted drives and placed one in a fireproof case. The other was copied onto a secure flash drive that Dylan slipped into a chain around his neck. "This," she said, "is the kill shot." They ran scenarios, legal, media, corporate, what kind of fallout they could expect. Dylan had been preparing for this moment ever since he took his first step into the restaurant as Mark Collins. But it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like justice. Not just for him, but for the people who believed in the brand, who came in every week with their kids, ordered the same meals they'd grown up on, trusted the food, the name, the values. They'd all been betrayed. And now, Dylan had the power to make it right. The next morning, Heritage Freed Chicken's legal team drafted cease and desist letters, backed by clear proof of trade secret violation. Natalie made anonymous drops to a series of investigative journalists known for exposing corporate fraud. And Dylan prepared his own speech, one he would deliver directly to the board, then to the public. He wasn't going to let Brent or Golden Rooster control the narrative. The facts were indisputable, the evidence was ironclad, and the damage they had done, to the company, to customers, to trust, would be their own undoing. The reckoning was coming. Not in whispers, not in shadows, but in broad daylight, with cameras rolling, documents printed, and truth too loud to be ignored. Back in his motel that evening, Dylan sat alone at the edge of the bed, looking at the flash drive in his hand. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "We're almost there, Grandma. Almost." He tucked the drive back into its chain and lay down, fully clothed, exhaustion finally overtaking him. But for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel something beyond fury and vigilance. He felt hope. The morning air was thick with anticipation. Dylan stood outside the Heritage Fried Chicken Midtown location, no longer wearing the flannel and boots of Mark Collins, but a crisp navy suit, the kind that once marked him as COO. His presence alone drew confused stares from employees arriving for the opening shift. For 2 weeks, he'd mopped floors among them, invisible. Now, he returned not as a worker, but as the man who built the ground they walked on. He took a breath, adjusted the chain around his neck that held the flash drive, and stepped inside. The interior buzzed with routine chaos. Orders flying out of the kitchen, Travis pacing near the front counter with a clipboard. Cody lounged near the service window, sipping coffee. Neither of them noticed Dylan right away. But when they did, their faces froze. "Morning, gentlemen," Dylan said, voice calm but unshakably firm. "We need to have a conversation." Travis blinked, confused. "Mark?" he said, the name coming out like a question, like a safety net slipping. "It's Dylan," he corrected, stepping forward. "Dylan Walker, Chief Operating Officer, Heritage Fried Chicken." Cody's cup fell from his hand, coffee splattering across the tile. "What is this?" Travis barked, already defensive. Dylan didn't flinch. "This is accountability," he replied. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out the flash drive. "I've spent the last 2 weeks gathering evidence. Every conversation, every stolen file, every dollar transferred from Brent Lawson to this branch to Golden Rooster. And it's all right here." Gasps rose from the nearby employees who had gathered behind the counter. Jenna stepped back, her eyes wide with disbelief and a flicker of relief. Right on cue, the front doors opened. 2 uniformed officers entered, followed by a stern-looking woman in a dark blazer. Heritage's chief legal counsel, and Natalie Chen, her expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. Dylan turned slightly and nodded to them. "Everything is in place," Natalie confirmed. "We're ready." Dylan looked back at Travis, who had gone pale. "We traced the recipe breach to Brent Lawson," he said, loud enough for the staff to hear. "He accessed a fake formula I planted on the executive server, one that your partners at Golden Rooster used in their recent launch. I have video of their signage, photos of the food, and a chemical breakdown proving the altered recipe. And I have your emails, Travis. The payouts, the inventory leaks, the sabotage." The room was silent. Even the fryer stopped hissing, as if the air itself had been sucked out. Then, from the back of the dining room, another man stepped forward. Tall, slick suit, tan complexion, and a smirk that never quite reached his eyes. "Dean Carter, CEO of Golden Rooster." "Let's all take a step back," Dean began, hands raised in faux diplomacy. "Surely there's a better way to resolve this than public accusations." Dylan turned to him. "You're standing in a restaurant you tried to destroy. You bought a stolen recipe. You approved a marketing campaign based on intellectual property theft. And your name is on the email welcoming Brent Lawson to your board." Dean's mask cracked. "This is absurd," he muttered, but Natalie stepped forward and handed each officer a folder. "Not absurd. Verified, and already filed with the state attorney's office." At that moment, one of the officers moved toward Travis, who took a panicked step back. Wait! It wasn't just me. Brent started it. I was following orders." Cody bolted for the back door, but was intercepted by the second officer. Within moments, both were in cuffs. Brent, who had just walked in through the side entrance, expecting a celebratory meeting, was stunned to see the scene unfold. His eyes locked with Dylan's. "You?" he began. "I trusted you," Dylan interrupted coldly. "You sat at my dinner table, held my daughter when she was born, and you sold out this company for a seat at the wrong table." Brent didn't resist as the officers stepped toward him. He simply dropped his briefcase, head hanging low. Dean Carter tried to protest one last time, but Natalie silenced him with a single line. "Our lawyers will be in touch. Bring a pen." The moment the doors closed behind the officers, Dylan turned back to the staff. Shock rippled across every face. Some whispered, some stood frozen. Jenna stepped forward. "You were here the whole time," she said quietly. "Watching." Dylan nodded. "Learning," he corrected, "and making sure this company still has a future. Because it does. Thanks to a few people who still believe in what it stands for." Then, louder, to everyone in the restaurant, "This isn't just about a recipe. It's about trust, about values, and about fixing what was broken together." The room remained quiet for a beat longer, and then someone clapped. Then another. Then the entire team, staff who just moments ago thought they were part of something collapsing, now stood behind their real leader, ready to rebuild. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens racing to keep up with every word. Brent Lawson stood before the judge, no longer in his tailored suits, but in a plain grey jumpsuit, his face a pale echo of the man who once thought he could outmaneuver the system he helped corrupt. The evidence had been overwhelming. The stolen recipe, the fraudulent wire transfers, the internal communications tying him directly to Golden Rooster's sabotage campaign. He didn't fight the charges, perhaps because there was no ground to stand on, perhaps because even he knew that some betrayals left scars too deep for denial. The judge's sentence was clear and firm: 10 years in federal prison for corporate espionage, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty. Travis received 4 years after agreeing to testify. Cody 2.5. They were footnotes in a much larger collapse, dominoes falling in a game they never fully understood. Outside the courthouse, Dylan didn't gloat. There were no fist pumps or victory speeches. He had seen firsthand how greed hollowed people out, how ambition, untethered from ethics, could turn men into shadows of themselves. Justice, yes, but no joy in it. What mattered now wasn't who fell, it was who rose from the ashes. And Dylan was determined that Heritage Fried Chicken would rise stronger than ever. The very next week, at a national press conference, he unveiled a sweeping reform agenda that stunned the industry. "This company," he said, "was built on trust. And I let that trust fray while I sat too far from the kitchen, too high above the ground. That ends today." First, he introduced a profit-sharing model that ensured all employees, from dishwashers to general managers, received a stake in the company's success. "If you help build it, you should benefit from it," he said. Applause erupted. But Dylan didn't stop there. He rolled out a leadership rotation program, mandating that every executive, including himself, work 1 full week per quarter in a live restaurant, taking on hourly shifts, facing customers, washing dishes if necessary. "You can't lead what you don't understand," he told his board. Some pushed back, others resigned. But those who remained, they were the ones ready to rebuild. He also created an employee assistance and integrity support program, offering mental health services, financial counseling, and a confidential reporting system for ethical concerns. No more whispers in back hallways. No more trading silence for security. "We don't just make chicken," Dylan said. "We make community. We protect each other." The most surprising announcement, however, came at the end of his speech. Dylan called Jenna onto the stage. Dressed professionally, her eyes scanned the crowd with equal parts humility and disbelief. "This young woman," Dylan began, "made a mistake. But she also made a choice: to speak up, to help, and to change. We don't throw people away at Heritage, we lift them." Jenna had been offered a second chance, and she didn't waste it. Now she would lead the very program designed to help employees facing the same pressures she once did. Her voice would become the voice for others who were afraid to ask for help. Her story would remind everyone that integrity could be found in the most unlikely of places, and so could redemption. In the months that followed, something remarkable began to happen. Heritage Fried Chicken's reputation not only recovered, It soared. Customers returned not just for the food, but for the story, for the values, for the truth. News outlets praised Dillon's reforms as a gold standard in post-crisis leadership. Other chains quietly began adopting similar models. Jenner's program became a blueprint for employee wellness across the industry, and the employees, they didn't just work, they believed. They smiled wider, worked harder, took pride in the apron they wore, because now they weren't just serving food, they were serving something bigger, something real. On a quiet afternoon, Dillon returned to the original restaurant his grandmother built. It had been remodeled, but the heart was unchanged. Her photo still hung above the counter, watching over everything with gentle resolve. Dillon stood beneath it, hands in his pockets, and whispered, "We protected it, Grandma, and we made it better." For the first time in years, he felt peace. Not because the storm had passed, but because they had learned how to build shelter from it. Justice had been served, renewal had begun, and Heritage Fried Chicken wasn't just surviving. It was leading a movement, one rooted in honesty, dignity, and the power of choosing what's right when no one is watching. The day Dillon Walker unveiled the new recipe was unlike any other in Heritage Fried Chicken's 50-year history. The press called it a culinary comeback, but for Dillon, it was something much deeper. It was personal. This wasn't just about flavor, it was about legacy. About a promise he made standing in his grandmother's kitchen as a boy, watching her coat each piece of chicken with patience and pride. About reclaiming the soul of a company nearly lost to greed and betrayal. Standing on the stage of the Heritage headquarters, with cameras rolling and staff members from across the country watching via live stream, Dillon pulled back a cloth to reveal a steaming platter of golden fried chicken. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a proud but steady voice, "I give you the new Heritage signature, crafted from the original, elevated with care, and approved by the woman who started it all." The reimagined recipe had been months in the making. Dillon had worked side by side with the executive chef and a group of longtime kitchen veterans, people who remembered the old ways, who knew the difference between nostalgia and authenticity. The new blend didn't overwrite the past. It honored it. It kept the familiar warmth, the iconic crunch, the spice that lingered just right. But now it was balanced better, with subtle herbs that made the flavor bloom on the tongue. It was the taste of home, refined, not replaced. The response was immediate. Customer reviews poured in. Food critics, who once dismissed Heritage as outdated, now called it a masterclass in brand revival. And perhaps most important of all, Dillon's own daughter, Ava, took a bite one evening and said, "It tastes like something Grandma would have made." That was the moment he knew he'd gotten it right. But Heritage's rebirth wasn't just culinary. Dillon knew that safeguarding the future required more than good food. It demanded good systems, good people, and good values. That's why the company's internal structure underwent the most ambitious transformation in its history. First came Recipe Vault, a decentralized AI-protected system that split sensitive culinary data across encrypted nodes, requiring multi-person biometric clearance to access. No more single points of failure, Dillon told his board. No more hidden shortcuts. Then came the Leadership Immersion Program, where every director, VP, and C-suite executive was required to spend time each quarter at a store, not as a guest, but as a worker. Dishwashing, line prep, taking customer orders. It was uncomfortable, it was humbling, and it worked. Morale skyrocketed, turnover dropped. For the first time in years, employees at every level felt truly seen. Transparency became more than a buzzword, it became a cornerstone. Every store installed live feedback boards, where customer reviews were streamed in real time. Every kitchen now operated under open prep design, allowing guests to watch their food being made. Behind the scenes, an internal dashboard gave employees a clear view of company financials, so they could see for themselves how their effort contributed to the bigger picture. And when profits hit an all-time high, Dillon didn't keep the celebration behind closed doors. Instead, He called an all-staff video call and personally announced the first round of profit-sharing bonuses distributed evenly across all levels. "You believed in this place when others walked away," he said. "Now it's time you shared in what we've rebuilt." Community also took center stage. Heritage launched a partnership initiative with local food banks, donating meals daily from surplus production. They opened Heritage Hubs, small neighborhood centers that offered free cooking classes, career workshops, and family events. Jenna, once caught in the crossfire of betrayal, now led those outreach efforts with confidence and empathy, her story inspiring dozens of others to choose growth over shame. And Dylan? He began spending his mornings visiting locations unannounced, not to inspect, but to listen, to ask questions, to shake hands, to thank dishwashers and store managers by name. In doing so, he found something unexpected, a deeper connection to the company than he'd ever felt in a boardroom. The brand that had nearly been brought to its knees by deception was now soaring higher than ever, not because it chased trends, but because it returned to its roots. Heritage Fried Chicken no longer defined success by quarterly margins alone, but by culture, impact, and how it made people feel when they walked through the door. Customers didn't just taste the difference, they felt it. In the smiles of the staff, in the clarity of operations, in the warmth of every bite. The company was no longer just a business. It was a living tribute to the woman who started it all, with flour on her hands and fire in her heart. And one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, Dylan stood alone in the original restaurant, now preserved as a museum and training space. He looked at the photo of Mary Walker, his grandmother, her hands mid-motion in a faded black and white still. "We did it, Grandma," he said quietly. "Not just the chicken, the whole thing. We made it matter again." Outside, a line was already forming for dinner. Heritage had been reclaimed. Not as a brand, but as a legacy. One built on truth, on resilience, and on the belief that when people lead with heart, nothing is ever truly lost. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that truth, redemption, and integrity still matter, then deep inside HQ is where you belong. We bring you stories that aren't just told, but felt. Stories that uncover the hidden, the buried, and the nearly forgotten, until someone decides to stand up and make it right. If you believe in justice that starts from within, in second chances that lead to something greater, and in leadership that dares to be human, then don't scroll past. Subscribe to Deep Inside HQ, share these stories, and help us keep the light shining where others try to hide the truth. This isn't just content, it's a movement, and we're just getting started.